This podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Bogosity. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. That's audibletrial.com/Bogosity. Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the 30th of May 2016, the podcast that slipped on a kiss and tumbled into love. This is your host, Shane Killian, and joining me again is Travis Retriever. Travis, welcome back to the show.
Rarf. Good to be back.
Let's saute the news of the Bogus. And this is a follow-up to something we talked about something like 3 years ago, Oracle versus Google. And if you remember, we were talking about software APIs and why it's ridiculous to consider them copyrighted. It's not really something that makes any sense to copyright, because what it basically is instructions for how you can interface with whatever it is, their language or their software or their technology or whatever.
Yeah, for those who aren't quite as tech-savvy, but the way I understand it is basically, for those who are just getting into programming, you know that weird thing you use to write your programs in and compile them and stuff, etc.? That's more kind of sort of what an API is, or at least the libraries that you import into it. Yeah,
it's the libraries you import, and it's also the programming techniques for interfacing with those libraries, things like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we talked last time about Judge William Alsup and just the awesome decision he had made that they weren't copyrightable. And it was great because what he had done was he had taken the time to teach himself how to program in Java so he could learn what it was all about, and then said, no, it's ridiculous to copyright it.
I freaking love this guy. Like, how many judges who presumably have zero technical expertise or experience would go through that much trouble?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and we'll have some similar things to say about the jury a little later on, but
yeah.
What had happened was, just to catch everyone up, the appellate court reversed it and said that they can be copyrighted, and so then it got knocked back down to the court so that they can have the trial where Google had to kind of switch tactics and claiming that their use of the Java APIs constitutes fair use. This is for the Android operating system, and the way you write Android apps is you program them in Java and you use those APIs to do it. And so they're saying that Google violated copyright by doing that. Google is saying it's fair use. So whatever the result of this, it shouldn't stop Google for long, because even before then, they had already committed to switching over to an open source version of Java in future versions of Android. But the problem is, saying that APIs are subject to copyright just opens the door wide for just all sorts of crazy lawsuits.
And I can already hear some of the detractors out there saying, oh, slippery slope fallacy. No, that is not a fallacy.
No, I mean, this is a precedent.
Yeah, big difference.
And they give a couple examples in here, like the tools people use to interface with Amazon's cloud service. Amazon could theoretically go after those companies that are making those for breach of copyright. And they also mentioned Micro Focus, who are the current owners of Unix, and POSIX is the API used for making a Unix-like operating system, like Linux or FreeBSD. If they wanted to, they could go after, and they're probably not going to, but they could go after Linux and FreeBSD saying, hey, you violated our copyright.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as if IP, despite being called quote-unquote property, is nothing more than a government-granted privilege, like, say, a monopoly, and is just being used to crush competition in startups.
That's pretty much what it's always been.
Yeah.
The property thing is just a ruse, because when mercantilism kind of fell out of fashion, they had to come up with some way of justifying it that was palatable.
Yeah, I saw this video on the history of it. It started about 500 years ago, and back then it was called by its proper name, censorship. But then after that fell out of favor, I think it was Queen Victoria Elizabeth, I can't remember who, decided to change the rhetoric and say, oh, no, it's a property right. Like, you know, so we can give these special royal-approved publishers the monopoly right. And that's what they were.
So you're thinking about that video from Copy Me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But the issue, as this Wired article points out, is just how difficult it is to explain technical stuff to jurors.
Yeah.
And it's even made worse by the fact that generally what they do, like what Oracle was doing in this case, is anytime there was someone being up for a juror during the voir dire who had really any degree of technical knowledge, they'd have them dismissed.
Classy.
Yeah. But I really have to give it up to the jury here because they were taking this very seriously. There are reports that one of them actually filled 3 notebooks just taking notes on all the technical stuff that was going on.
Wow.
And last Friday, the jury asked Judge Alsop, and he agreed to let them take their notebooks home so they could study them over the weekend.
Aww.
So, I mean, they really took it seriously.
I'm really loving this judge.
Yeah.
I mean, he just is so awesome. I want to shake his hand and maybe give him a hug. Seriously.
And I really like the way he described APIs, the metaphor he used. Google made this metaphor about filing cabinets that just kind of contrived. I mean, I see where they were coming from, but someone who's not technical, I don't really see how they'd see it. But what Alsop said in 2012 was, quote, "Each package is like a bookshelf in the library. Each class is like a book on the shelf. Each method is like a how-to-do-it chapter in a book. Go to the right shelf, select the right book, and open it to the chapter that covers the work you need." And that is a beautiful description of object-oriented programming, which is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, since Java is object-oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so by organizing it that way, Google made it a lot easier for programmers to write Android apps because they just use that same structure. Now, back when Google did this, Java was owned by Sun Microsystems, and their licensing terms prohibited companies from building their own version without approval, but also ruled that the Android platform wasn't really a Java implementation since all they did was borrow the API. So it's kind of like Linux. They borrowed that POSIX API and kind of made their own version of a Unix-like operating system without actually copying any code from Unix. So that was kind of the same thing they did there. And you had the former Sun CEO Jonathan Schwartz testifying that Java was always supposed to be free and open, and Sun was always okay with Google's use of the APIs, but now that Oracle's taking it over, they have a problem with that.
And I also saw that apparently they tried to poison the well with him, saying, oh, but he was a rubbish CEO, so this is probably just, him continuing that tradition or some such bollocks.
Yeah.
This is despite the fact that all the available data showing that open source and other stuff tends to be more successful.
But that's why you have things like Microsoft recently open sourced its .NET platform. And you also...
Microsoft open source something?
Yeah.
Oh my god, my heart. You're kidding me.
Yeah, check for other signs of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you also have other open source technology standards. This article mentions from Cisco, Intel, and IBM. And that's kind of the way it goes, because when a new technology starts off, you have all of these different players doing all of their different things, and they're all kind of hoping that they'll be the dominant one that takes over. And when it becomes clear that doesn't happen, they kind of say, okay, let's just make our systems work together and make a standard API for it. Now, literally less than 2 hours before we started recording, we did it early this week, Ars Technica reported that the jury is in, and they have actually sided with Google that this is a fair use implementation of Java. All 37 Java APIs are protected by fair use.
That's the good news. Now, the bad news, unfortunately, is that Oracle has vowed to appeal. But it makes me wonder how long this has been going on. I'm reading this like, this legal crap, these battles, these are just going forever. My God.
Yeah, brand new technologies come in and go obsolete by the time all this goes through.
No kidding. It's like, how many appeals are they allowed to have? Like, I mean, please don't tell me the justice system allows, like, as many as you can afford, or however many you like, or some such bollocks.
Well, I think the way it goes is this goes up to the appeals court, and after the appeals court, last time, Google appealed it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declined to hear it. So I think that's just it. If it happens again, whoever loses on appeal can try and appeal it to the Supreme Court and see if they can get it to take the case.
And it sounds like if the Supreme Court says, piss off, then I guess it stays as it is. So
the jury deliberated for 3 days, which is also to their credit. They really took the time to figure this out. And Judge Alsop said to them, quote, I salute you for your extreme hard work in this case. With the thanks of your United States District Court, you are now discharged. I would like to come into the jury room and shake each of your hands individually.
I'd like to do that too, and maybe give them all, including the judge, a hug.
Yep. So, in a statement, Google said, quote, "Today's verdict that Android makes fair use of Java APIs represents a win for the Android ecosystem, for the Java programming community, and for software developers who rely on open and free programming languages to build innovative consumer products."
That it is. And as we can see, Oracle vowed, however, to appeal, and I don't know, maybe it's just me or something, but as I'm reading this, well, do you also think they sound kind of like threatening or thugs or something? Or
Well, yeah, because this is Dorian Daley, Oracle's general counsel, quote, "We strongly believe that Google developed Android by illegally copying core Java technology to rush into the mobile device market. Oracle brought this lawsuit to put a stop to Google's illegal behavior. We believe there are numerous grounds for appeal, and we plan to bring this case back to the Federal Circuit on appeal."
Grief.
Yeah, so it's like after many, many years of Sun and then Oracle not being able to make a profit with Java no matter how they tried, Google comes along and does it, and now they're upset and they want a piece of it.
This is something that completely baffles me about the statements made regarding damages with this stuff. Like, how do you...
Oh, they were asking for like $9.2 billion in damages.
I think it was like, what's his face, Dale Everett, the Anarchy in Your Head guy, pointed out, like, how do you even prove you got those damages? Like, say if someone, I don't know, defrauds me for $150, okay, that's easy and quantifiable. But if someone uses something to make a profit that you tried and couldn't, how exactly do you prove that? Especially when you yourself already had it and even longer and had more chances and still failed at it.
But unfortunately, with the way our court system works, it's not like there's an objective criteria. I could sue you right now for $15 million billion trillion. You know, there's nothing stopping me asking the jury for that much. Now, I won't get it, of course, but, you know, there's no objective criteria. And it'd be nice if, you know, the jury had like this little checklist that says, okay, we agree with that. That's this amount of money. We agree with that. That's that. No, they're just left to come up with whatever number they want to agree with.
Yeah. The only way I can think of that would justify such things would be if a person as a businessman is entitled to make a profit from their wares, which it would basically be saying that all businesses are never allowed to fail. I mean, is that really the path people want to go? Well, okay, maybe with the bailouts, at least with the bigger players, that may be one thing, but the computer industry, for better and worse, the closest thing to a free market that we have. I mean, as lame, pathetic, and nerdy as it sounds, the internet has basically been my home away from home since about 2004-ish. It means a lot to me, and the communities I've made despite personal issues I've discussed with you off the record, mind. But yeah, I mean, it just hurts me to see this BS tear it apart, and hurt it, etc., and cause the rifts that it does, you know?
Say, if you're tired of the promos in this podcast, well, the patrons got it early and with no ads or promos. Just go to patreon.bogosity.tv and donate at any level. Hackers, terrorists, the NSA. But I repeat myself. Your online security is under attack, and the weakest point is your password. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass plugs into your browser and allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords anywhere on the web, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers and all your computers, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, membership info, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications and even mobile devices, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now. So, we just heard the LastPass promo. I hope everyone who listens to this podcast is employing good password security, even if you're not using LastPass specifically. We've certainly talked about the issues a lot, but an interesting report from Gigya has shown something interesting. Baby boomers have better password habits than millennials.
I'm not gonna lie, that completely took me by storm. I mean, what? But I thought millennials were supposed to be the tech-savvy ones. But then I guess tech-savvy isn't always the same as security-savvy.
That's true. Now, the report requires registration to view, but fortunately Naked Security had a good write-up on it. And so by baby boomers, they meant people aged 51 to 69. They were most likely to use the best practice of having a unique password for each and every online account. 65% of respondents said they had 5 or more passwords across their online account, compared with just 44% of millennials, which they defined as 18 to 34.
Then I must be an awesome one, because I have a unique password for all of my online accounts, and I have, let's see, over 100, maybe 200 passwords randomly generated by a LastPass.
Yeah, I've got more like 500 of them.
To skip to the end for a bit, I noticed they talked about security and the sites also being compromised. Like, to give you an idea, a site I frequent for Affinity recently had a hacker attack, and the passwords I had on that were obviously compromised. It wouldn't necessarily count against the strength of my password or stuff, since one, FA doesn't offer multi-authentication stuff, at least it didn't at the time. Now it uses that type in the security image, like the numbers and strings and stuff.
The CAPTCHA.
Yeah, that's it. And also, I used LastPass to randomly generate passwords for my accounts there, so it wasn't anything I could have helped.
I was reading a report on this, and one thing Fur Affinity did, which is exactly what they should have done, they immediately reset everyone's passwords.
Yeah.
So the next time you log in, you have to make a new password.
Yes, which is what FA did. And though they didn't make it so that the password reset page was HTTPS, however, I'm told that they were called out on it, and near as I can tell, they did correct that after they were called out on it.
Oh, okay. So hopefully that was just a mistake.
I mean, I'm hoping
just someone made a typo or something.
Yeah. I mean, it happens to the best of us.
Yeah. But the thing is, if you're reusing passwords, you not only have to change your Fur Affinity password, but all of the other websites you use that same password on.
And it's especially severe if, say, you use your same password that you would on, say, a site like that you do for, to use a random example, your bank account.
Yeah.
Do I even need to go into why that's a bad idea?
Now, the report didn't give figures on us Gen Xers, 35 to 50, Generation X. But it did say only 16% of people follow best practices overall, so maybe we're the ones bringing up the rear here.
Oh, God. Well, then I'm glad to know that you're an exception to the rule, because you're much better at this crap than even I am.
Now, they also found that the baby boomers were less likely to use passwords that you know aren't secure. Password 1234, let me in, you know, their birthday or whatever.
There are people who still use those, even in this day and age. Oh my God, guys. I'm trying to say this in the least jerkish way possible, but when I hear that, the words "you are totally asking for it" come to mind in this day and age. I mean, come on.
So 53% of boomers claim they never used easy-to-remember but insecure passwords, compared to 42% of us Gen Xers and 33% of millennials.
Huzzah! I'm in the 33%. Go me. And if my LastPass scores to be believed, I'm in the top 1% of LastPass users.
As am I.
Hoot!
High five.
Yeah, high five. That's 1% that we can both be proud of being in.
More than 25% of respondents said that they didn't bother creating gnarly passwords, whatever that means. I guess that means like randomly generated ones for sites associated with their financials, such as their bank accounts or e-commerce sites. I'm guessing that means the high entropy passwords that's just all scrambled up.
Yeah, I think that's what they mean by that. 90s kid here, I know what that word means.
They're speculating on why this might be, and one thing they say is the older we get, the more money we have to protect. We've got life savings, we've got pensions, we've got assets, and so there's a greater desire to protect it all. Also, I think when you're younger, there's kind of this "it can't happen to me" mentality.
Yeah, I would think so too, you know. But when you get older, you get more jaded and more cautious, you know. I mean, I think, as I noticed that the more older people among the fearmongers, they tend to be older and more jaded and stuff. For better in this case, and for worse in the busybody case, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah.
But older people were twice as likely as millennials to set up two-factor authentication. But this is the part I thought was interesting. over all age groups, more than 25% of respondents have had an online account compromised in the past 12 months. For millennials, it was up to 35%, but it went to less than 20% for baby boomers. Now, the reason why I find that interesting is that I would think that if you've had your account compromised, then you're going to be using better password security.
I know, right?
I mean, it's like I've always said, show me someone who is religious about doing backups, and I'll show you a guy who lost a lot of information irretrievably because he didn't do backups.
Yeah, that would be me.
And me.
Yeah, oh, God. So I don't know how
I really hate thinking about how long it took me to learn that lesson. It's embarrassing.
Oh, my God. Hey, better late than never, as that cliche goes.
Yeah.
Something I found a bit annoying, though, is how it says... Right or wrong, Geisha is suggesting that millennials, quote, lack the patience and dedication of older generations when it comes to security best practices, or maybe just because they're older and therefore, say, a minute or an hour of time isn't as long of their life as it is compared to someone who's younger. So that combined with them just being, and then the fact that they're just, they've just learned it. I mean, stop acting like this is something inherent.
Well, I mean, they've had more time to learn the lessons. That's why that last figure is kind of surprising to me. Of course, it was just over the last 12 months. They might have been compromised years ago and learned their lesson then.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
They've had a longer time for something to go wrong to say, oh, no, I got to do this.
Exactly. So is that because of their writing their convoluted passwords on sticky notes and sticking them on their keyboards or under their monitors as snarked one/that commenter, possibly some uppity strupping youngin'? Someone who's probably a sage, silver-haired security savant snarked this back. The day malware can lift your keyboard to look, the seniors are going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, that's one thing where I kind of feel bad that we spent so long telling people not to write down passwords.
Yeah.
We meant, like, in a place of business, don't write it down on a Post-it note and stick it on the monitor, but,
Yeah.
But you probably want to put it somewhere a little more secure than the bottom of your keyboard.
Oh, absolutely.
If you got a drawer that locks or you got a safe or something like that, put it in there.
I also like this one bit how they said, it could be that some older people aren't even aware that their accounts have been compromised. And I would say that as a younger guy, as I commented about for Affinity, it could be that a lot of younger people are more likely to use sites that are newer or, not just banking accounts and stuff. So they're less likely to maybe have good security practices and are therefore more likely to be compromised, like regardless of what I do as a user. So that could also be a factor in that as well.
But LastPass has a good security challenge they can have you run, and one of the things it'll do is tell you if any of your accounts have been compromised. And there's also great sites like HaveIBeenPwned.com. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
This next one is interesting.
Yeah, and we've talked before about the regulations springing up around remote-controlled helicopters, which is what they mean when they say drones. But anyway, these things have been around for decades, but somehow the press started really talking them up and got all this hysteria going up about it. And we've talked about the idiocy of regulating drones for commercial use, but allowing private use, like you put money in and all of a sudden that changes things.
That is a mentality among leftists that I will legitimately never understand. How is it that an action that is otherwise okay, safe, nice, and moral suddenly becomes evil, corrupt, bad, and undesirable once money is involved? I just don't get that.
But it was like you had like the MPAA complaining about them, which really said, yeah, I think this is more about going against indie filmmakers because now it's better for us indie filmmakers to get things like the aerial shots, and they didn't want the competition. And by the way, I promise you, we're not the anti-copyright podcast, although you might think that, especially given what this week's biggest Bogon emitter is all about, but we just keep having all these bad copyright stories to talk about.
Well, I personally am very anti-IP on principle, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, we're not trying to focus on it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're more general Bogosity woo. The problem is, it's just that government tends to produce a lot of woo and Bogon, so we have to be the ones to fling out them cluons to help neutralize them.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also had Amazon and other places wanting to use them for delivery, and Amazon, they're a big player now, but they're still not in the good old boys club, and when they started, their very existence kind of stuck in the crawl of the big companies, and big retailers have always looked for ways to take them down, so it might just be another one of those.
And funny how the companies that tend to do this are always the ones that are, how shall I put this delicately, complete jerks. Whereas the ones like Amazon tend to be some of the best rated, the best rated company to work with, etc. on the planet. I mean, I love them. I think they're awesome. More power to you, Amazon. You too, Google.
So the Wall Street Journal has an interesting pair of articles from two legal experts, one arguing for government restrictions and one arguing against, and we'll start with one arguing for.
Something that bothered me about the presentation here, and the way they're kind of framing this is, they kind of make it sound like, well, one, that property rights and innovation are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they're both kind of doing that.
They do realize that voluntarily forming communities among property rights, etc., they do know that's possible and is a thing that happens in the real world, yes. If you say otherwise, you are wrong and arguing with observed, verifiable fact.
So, this first article saying yes is from A. Michael Frumkin, and one thing he says is, quote, if someone flies a drone over your land below the FAA's reserved airspace, the drone operator is quite simply trespassing in the same way as if the operator ran through your backyard. Well, no, not really, because the reason why the physical trespasser is doing something wrong is because you have no idea what his intentions are. He's in a position where he could hurt you, where he could do some damage, and that's not the case with the drone flying 100 feet in the air that's going to be well over your property in 10 seconds. So it's not really the same kind of thing. And I mean, unless you're using that part, that's 100 feet up or whatever it is, can you really be said to have homesteaded it as part of your property?
No kidding. Since last I checked, that's not really how property works. I can make a claim over, say, the moon all I want, but unless I can effectively make good use of it, that claim of homesteading is completely toothless and worthless.
Well, I mean, if it's, 6 feet off the ground or something, that's a different matter.
Well, yeah,
and especially if they're where they can see in your window or something like that.
But I mean, unless we're talking about someone who builds an apartment complex in New York where it has to be really, really tall, like over 1,000 feet, I mean, although I imagine that's probably a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, if you've built a skyscraper, yeah, it's going to have to be based on what you've built on your property and how high up it goes and how close the drones are going to that.
So in other words, individual situations and individual rights, not just this one-size-fits-all.
But he says, quote, drones can carry surveillance gear and can be operated from long distances or fly autonomously. Drones can film, record sounds, or listen in on Wi-Fi and other signals, and no fence is high enough to keep them out. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they're gonna do it, so once again, why don't you go after the people who are actually doing it?
You thought that too, right? I'm thinking, does this guy completely not know of the NSA and the insane BS that the FBI and others are doing? If he's really that concerned about privacy, why isn't he going tooth and nail after these jerks? Seriously.
Like with their stingrays and everything.
And, oh god, who knows what else?
Where they just hijack your cell phone signals.
No kidding.
They don't even have to go on your property to do that.
Also, as for the Wi-Fi stuff, folks, listen carefully. Put secure passwords on those too.
Yep. Should be doing that.
Sheesh.
And as far as the surveillance, I think what people really are afraid of is just kind of some creeper perving in on your teenage daughter sunbathing in the backyard. But it's not Amazon or Taco Bell that's going to be doing that, so...
I mean, he does try to address that somewhat later down the line, quote, we should ignore claims that the needs of progress require that we allow drone overflights so that Americans can enjoy home delivery via taco copter. Or more likely by the Amazon Prime drone. If the delivery is to you, we'll treat that as implied consent, just like we do with a United Parcel Service. Otherwise, GPS-enabled drones can fly above public roads in regulated traffic layers. They don't need to fly over private property.
Yeah, but have you seen the way some of those roads go, and you're going to make them twist and turn all around like that?
God.
That's just completely inefficient.
I know, right?
And all you're going to do there is limit their range.
No kidding. That kind of completely defeats the purpose of using drones in the first place. Well, one of them.
But I mean, he's just using fear-mongering, quote, you could be spied on by anyone with a few $100s and a voyeuristic streak, so go against that guy!
No kidding!
Don't go against everyone else who wants to use drones. Now, there is one point he makes here that's pretty good. He says, quote, police likely wouldn't need a warrant to run drone surveillance anywhere they want. Generally, the government needs a warrant to intrude on private property, but doesn't need one to conduct surveillance from public places, including what the Supreme Court has called public navigable airspace. If we reclassify the airspace above private property as accessible to private drones, that likely takes the warrant requirement along with it. Cheap, continuous drone surveillance might make the Fourth Amendment almost irrelevant. But the problem is, that's not the only alternative. It's not a question of make it private property or make it public airspace and remove all of that. You could just say...
Okay, well, let me just start off with this one thing. First off, quote, that makes the Fourth Amendment almost irrelevant. You mean it already isn't already? Are you kidding me?
Hell yeah.
Has he not seen what's been on the news these past few years? Good lord.
Yeah, but, I mean, you could do something like, I'm thinking of what the FCC did with the 2.4 gigahertz range. That's what most Wi-Fi is on. So it's unregulated. You can transmit on it as much as you want, as long as it's not more powerful than this amount or whatever. But police still need a warrant if they want to snoop on your Wi-Fi.
Well, on paper anyways, but, you know.
Well, yeah, whether they've been doing that is another question, but legally, they have to get a warrant to do it. So, I mean, you could just have that be the same way if it's below 500 feet, but with all these other restrictions, it's just unrestricted airspace, but it's not a public navigable area, which would be like as long as the drone is, so high up above any buildings, and as long as it's going at a certain speed, through the property or whatever, to make it clear that it's not going to try to do anything there, unless that's the property it's delivering to, of course. I mean, there are ways you could write this, to make it work.
And what kills me about this is about his constant complaints regarding private property, because as we all know, people can never just form mutual agreements with each other. There's no homeowners associations. There are no standards within people for coming together voluntarily to do that stuff. No. It has to be just, individual bumpkins with a gun pointing out saying, get off my lawn!
And he says, quote, if we give drones overflight rights, every time you see one in the air, you will have reason to fear it may be spying on you or could crash. It's like, how does he come to that conclusion?
And let's not forget to talk about the armed drones, right? Because then he'd have to talk about the ones controlled by GovCo, and he doesn't want to do that, does he?
Well, but that's one of the things they're doing to raise this panic about, like that one video of the guy who put, I think it was a flamethrower on a drone, but that thing was having a hard time staying 6 feet off the ground.
Really?
Yeah, and there's actually a drone fighting group called Game of Drones where you use quadcopters, and it's a 20 by 20 by 20 caged, although it's really more of a net, so I guess it doesn't damage the drones if they run into it. The flyers aren't in there, they're outside the net, but the idea is they try to use their drone to knock the other out of the air. And the rules don't disqualify weapons. They could use weapons if they want, but they don't because it adds weight.
Yeah.
And weight is your enemy here.
Indeed. But then we get to the other guy who...
And this is Ryan Kalo doing the no argument.
Yeah. So basically, he strikes off as well, no, we need to do this stuff for the good of the collective, for technology.
Both of them are talking about the collective and not really talking about the individual. So he says, quote, even with innovative tools like AirMap, which provides an easy way for drone operators to determine if a particular airspace is legally navigable, few have the time or resources to secure every property owner's permission. Functionally, an opt-in system amounts to a permanent ban foreclosing any young entrepreneur's plans to do something innovative and useful with a drone.
These people think like lawyers. They need to start thinking like entrepreneurs. Seriously.
And he also has a good response to the surveillance question, quote, why would an energy, pharmaceutical, or agricultural company permit an activist or journalist to fly over its property in search of abuses? I agree that privacy is a crucial issue when it comes to drones, and as I've testified before the U.S. Senate, we need to do more to ensure that privacy laws keep up with the technology. No one expects you to suffer a drone hovering over your backyard, watching you sunbathe, or waking you up at 3 a.m. on its way to deliver a six-pack to a graduate student. And if a drone damages your property or injures your person, there ought to be, and already is, legal recourse. So, I mean, you have to think of the chilling effects.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, but a lot of this just strikes me as much ado about nothing, certainly compared to what's going on out there. I mean, it kind of reminds me of all the fear-mongering that happens every time a new technology becomes more and more widespread, like, oh, but what about this, what about that? It's like, guys, let the engineers, the entrepreneurs, and the consumers, etc., and the rest of us find voluntary ways around this stuff. Okay, chill.
Well, and it's like they're still trying to figure out how to deal with things like, the paparazzi, they follow a public figure around. Even in private places, they're, snapping pictures and things like that. And, the question is, is there a significant public interest in doing that? But if you just shop them off from the start, then you don't get any of the scandals uncovered.
Indeed.
That's happened from. You'd have to wait for a whistleblower.
And we all know that the US and our government is totally tolerant and loving towards whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Lol. But, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the broken window fallacy here. It needs to be mentioned. Don't just think about the seen, which is what they're talking about. Think about the unseen. What benefits could also come from this stuff as well, I mean, who knows? Last I checked, these guys aren't psychics.
I mean, I get the property rights argument. That's good. That appeals to me. But you kind of have to think about, what are we actually talking about? What sort of threats do they... And that first guy knows it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been fear-mongering about the surveillance and drones crashing out of the sky and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of ambivalent about both of these two's positions. Like, on the one hand, I like the first guy and his appeals to property rights, which... As libertarians, this definitely hits a chord with the both of us, But I really don't like his fear-mongering. That is a huge turn-off to me as a skeptic. The other guy, well, I do like his emphasis on innovation and the like, and what could be, as a technology enthusiast, or at least someone who sympathizes with technology enthusiasts. That definitely appeals to me. But I don't like his, we must think of the collective over individual property owners, etc., etc. Oh, the collective, hail the Borg. I mean, I don't really like that.
But I mean, it's just going back to think about why property rights exist and why they're logically valid to begin with. It's about keeping the things that you've produced and obtained with your own labor and protecting yourself from harm.
No kidding.
So as long as neither of those are in play, what's the complaint about?
And sorry, but... well, those drones flying somewhere in my neighborhood makes me sad in the pants is not a valid property complaint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dave. You may recognize me from previous Bogosity episodes. I'm also part of a podcast, the Superplex Brothers Podcast. Head on over to superplexbros.com. You can check out the podcast for video games and pro wrestling. We also have news, reviews, and editorials and all kinds of stuff just to talk about video games and pro wrestling and everything else that comes in between. So if you're into that, why don't you come check us out?
And now it's time to close the tags of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week it goes to the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. They've been the stewards of the open web standards for decades now, developing the free and open standards that have made the web flourish. Until now.
Oh dear.
And guess what? It's all tied in with copyright.
Of course.
DRM specifically.
Well, even worse than that, as we'll soon see, spoiler alert, the biggest one they're using is, that's right, the DMCA. Oh, how I hate this law. Why, oh why does this even exist? F you Clinton for signing that horrid thing. And
I love the write-up EFF did on this called Save Firefox. I really like it when these things are well written. I can just read them out. That's great.
Yeah? I know.
They say, quote, "Once upon a time, there were two major browsers that virtually everyone used, Netscape and Internet Explorer, locked in a death battle for the future of the web. Then a game changer. The open non-profit Mozilla browser spun out of Netscape with the mission of putting users, not publishers, in charge. Mozilla defaulted to blocking pop-up ads, the scourge of the early web. It was a step none of the major browsers could afford to take because publishers were convinced they would go broke without them, and any company whose browser blocked pop-ups by default would alienate the publishers who'd throw their lot in with the competition. A little over a decade later, and the world of browsers is unrecognizable. Mozilla turned into Firefox, Internet Explorer turned into Edge, Apple launched Safari, and Google launched Chrome. Every one of them blocks pop-ups by default. Literally none of the dominant browsers from a decade ago are in widespread use today.
I was a bit surprised to see that Internet Explorer is no longer a thing, like it's now Edge. I mean, I still have Internet Explorer on my computer, but then I use Windows 7, so yeah.
Yeah, it's on Windows 10. Internet Explorer is still there just for backwards compatibility, but it's Edge they're moving everyone over to.
Yeah.
Quote, which is not to say that there isn't competition. There is, and it's as fierce as ever, and as ever it's a strategic fight to please both publishers and users whose interests are not always the same. Publishers want to gather more information on users. Users want to keep their information private. Publishers want to control users' browsing and viewing experience. Users want to sit in the driver's seat. We need more Firefoxes. We need more browsers that treat their users rather than publishers as their customers. We may never get another one, though.
Agreed. There is one thing I need to comment on. It's a bit about information collecting and stuff. The biggest legit fear of that would be either government doing horrid things with it, as they are known to do, because, well, they're government, or hackers and unscrupulous groups or individuals doing horrid things with it. The bit with businesses doing stuff with it, I mean, mainly their deal with that is just, to find out which products and sites you like to go to, recommend you to others like it. Data collection like that doesn't have to be this evil, bad thing,
But we do still need that balance. I mean, the users need to be considered the customers here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let users choose. I mean, do you want more of one or the other?
Competition, like you said.
Yeah, or even within the browser saying, okay, here are the risks and the benefits of going closer to either side.
So, quote, the W3C, once the force for open standards that kept browsers from locking publishers to their proprietary capabilities, has changed its mission. Since 2013, the organization has provided a forum where today's dominant browser companies and the dominant entertainment companies can collaborate on a system to let our browsers control our behavior rather than the other way. This system, Encrypted Media Extensions, EME, uses standards, defined code to funnel video into a proprietary container called a content decryption model. For a new browser to support this new video streaming standard, which major studios and cable operators have been pushing for, gee, imagine that, it would have to convince those entertainment companies or one of their partners to let them have a CDM, or this part of the open web would not display in their new browser. This is the opposite of every W3C standard to date. Once all you needed to do to render content sent by a server was follow the standard, not get permission. If browsers had needed permission to render a page at the launch of Mozilla, the publishers would have frozen out this new pop-up blocking upstart. Kiss Firefox goodbye, in other words.
Yeah, not just the seen, but the unseen. We see the stuff that we have now, but we don't see what could have been and what is being prevented from forming.
So they go on to say, quote, the W3C didn't have to do this. No copyright law says that making a video gives you the right to tell people who legally watch it how they must configure their equipment. But because of the design of EME, copyright holders will be able to use the law to shut down any new browser that tries to render the video without their permission because it's designed to trigger liability under Section 1201 of the DMCA. And that's the part that says that you're not allowed to actually remove a digital lock, even if you're doing it for a legitimate purpose. It's even worse than at first glance. The DMCA isn't limited to the USA. The US Trade Representative has spread DMCA-like rules to virtually every country that does business with America. Worse still, the DMCA is also routinely used by companies to threaten and silence security researchers who reveal embarrassing defects in their products.
Yeah, so much for individual or even national sovereignty. I mean, that sounds like a U.S. law going way out of its bounds of scope.
But it gets even worse.
Oh my god, you are kidding me.
Quote, The W3C also declined to require its members to protect security researchers who discover flaws in EME, leaving every web user vulnerable to vulnerabilities whose disclosure can only safely take place if the affected company decides to permit it.
Shameful.
So they just close off saying, the W3C, quote, needs to hear from you now. Please share this post and spread the word. Help the W3C be the organization it was meant to be.
I shared it on my Facebook, and you did too, so yeah, we're doing our part.
Yeah, I mean, this is big. The whole reason why the web exploded the way it did was because of open standards where you didn't have to get permission from this person or that person to display content.
No kidding. This is just reprehensible.
And if this had existed, it's not just Firefox that wouldn't exist, it's Netflix, or also Amazon. Just think of all the things that wouldn't exist if this had been in the place then. So hopefully they'll reverse course on this. Until then, the W3C will just have to remain this week's biggest Bogon emitter. Now you can make Amazon purchases with Bitcoin by going to purse.bogosity.tv. That's P-U-R-S-E. Moreover, most purchases can be made at a discount. Save an average of 20% just by buying from Purse, or get even greater discounts by linking your Amazon wish list. Go to purse.bogosity.tv. Bogosity.tv is a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for sites to earn advertising fees by advertising and linking to Amazon.com. Just clear your cookies and go to amazon.bogosity.tv, or check the right-hand side of the podcast page for Amazon's best deals, including the deal of the day and limited-time lightning deals on all sorts of great products. So next time you buy online, go to amazon.bogosity.tv. And now let's say me to this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week we have a first for the podcast, an Idiot Extraordinaire double hit. Yes, the FBI has taken Idiot Extraordinaire for being stupid twice in the same week about two different things, as this pair of Tech Dirt articles shows. The first one has to do with that child porn website which they ran on tour. We talked about that. They put malware on visitors' machines to try and find out who they were. Now the FBI is saying that the malware isn't malware at all.
And I love their weak attempt to justify this. Well, because it doesn't disrupt your settings or...
Well, because it nice and neatly removes itself.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it didn't cause any lasting damage. We are talking about spyware here. That's absolutely what it is. Because you've taken measures to protect your privacy, and this thing starts collecting your personal data, your IP address and stuff like that, and sending it back to the FBI. Now, I have no idea what this judge is thinking, because on the one hand, he's saying that the FBI shouldn't be forced to hand over the details on this malware, and it is malware, to the defendant. But at the same time, the judge said, well, the defendant has good reasons to need to have access to this. And it's like he's trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, the last two paragraphs on this really hit home. Quote, child porn enthusiasts and other criminals aren't the only people who take active steps to obscure their connection points. Journalists do it. Activists do it. Citizens of oppressive government, cough China, cough, do it. The FBI doesn't restrict itself to only deploying its surveillance tools against the worst of the worst. It has a long, troubling history of deploying its surveillance tools against people engaged in activities protected by the First Amendment. Anything that undoes something that the recipient has proactively done is, by definition, unwanted, if not full-on malicious.
And I also like what they point out in the last paragraph about how the FBI wouldn't think this tool was so benign if it was used against them, because they say, quote, this would definitely fit under the CFAA's broad definition of unauthorized access. Deploying this NIT, that's a network investigative technique, via a compromised FBI server would make it a lot easier to locate agents working in the field. I don't think the FBI would be okay with this, despite there being no residual malware left behind after field devices had been identified and located.
But different morality and rules for thee than for me. As usual.
Now, the other is an unintended consequence, but not an unforeseeable one, of their attempts to force companies to hand over what information they say, whenever they say, even if it's encrypted. And especially after going after Apple to make them decrypt the San Bernardino phone.
Oh, yeah. And for those who haven't yet cottoned on, you can follow this under good news.
So now, tech firms dealing with sensitive data are encrypting it while they need it and deleting it entirely as soon as possible. And according to the founder and chief executive of Envoy, quote, "We have to keep as little information as possible so that even if the government or some other entity wanted access to it, we'd be able to say, we don't have it."
And being truthful of it, too.
And they also talk about Stealth Worker, which is a startup that started up 6 months ago. Their chief executive, Ken Baylor, said that in the past he'd been approached by a half-dozen companies looking for ways to build tougher encryption and other ways to stop doing this. And really, I think what you have, I got to throw brickbats here to the former NSA General Counsel Stuart Baker when he said, quote, "This is a Silicon Valley delusion that the government wants to outlaw encryption. I grant that there is a radicalized subculture of engineers that is very prone to that delusion, but it is a delusion. But what they want to do breaks encryption."
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a straw man fallacy. It's true, the government doesn't want to outright ban encryption, well, presumably at least, but no, they just want to ban good encryption. So, functionally, it might as well be the same thing.
Exactly, yeah. And Bruce Schneier pointed out in his Applied Cryptography textbook, which is an awesome textbook, by the way, that there are two kinds of crypto. One that stops major governments from reading your message, and the kind that stops your little sister from reading your message. So if you break crypto so that major governments can read your message, guess which category it moves into? So the only kind of crypto we'd be allowed is the one that'll just let us keep it from our kid sister, but vulnerable to everyone else.
Yeah. They do realize that there are unscrupulous individuals out there, right? Like hackers who will be jumping in glee at this because it means that it'll be that much easier for them to hack into systems, steal people's identities, and overall wreak havoc.
Yeah, at this point, there's not much that a major government can do regarding cryptography and computer security that a well-funded hacker organization can't.
And yeah, it says we can keep our encryption, but only if you allow ways for third parties to decrypt it, which, for those who haven't cottoned on yet, completely defeats the purpose of encryption. It's like saying, sure, you can have a lock to your door, but you have to have the keys displayed very easily, pretty much hanging from the door itself.
So all of that makes the FBI our first double hitter.
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this What Better Way to Say I Love You Than With the Gift of a Spatula edition of the Bogosity Podcast. Come join the discussion at forum.bogosity.tv and feel free to join in by sending a question, statement, news article, or rant in text or audio to podcast@bogosity.tv. This podcast depends on you to keep going, so please donate using the links on the website or the QR codes on the YouTube video. You can also become a patron at patreon.bogosity.tv and get the podcast and YouTube videos early and without ads or promos. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Travis Retriever for joining me.
Wash, it was good to be here, as always.
Until next time, here's a quote from Cory Doctorow. "It's impossible to overstate how bonkers the idea of sabotaging cryptography is to people who understand information security. Use deliberately compromised cryptography that has a backdoor that only the good guys are supposed to have the keys to, and you have effectively no security. You might as well skywrite it as encrypted with pre-broken, sabotaged encryption." The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
Want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again. I think I finally got Windows 10 to understand what I want my sound settings to be and to keep them that way.
I'm still on Windows 7. I'm afraid to go to Windows 10, man.
If anything, 10's better than 7. With Windows 7, I was just having to reset up everything pretty much from scratch every week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit nervous about it still, just because, maybe it's just because of, Microsoft and them, but yeah.
But I do nightly images of my system disk, so I always knew I could roll back if I needed to.